Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've worked in the underbelly of Paris for 17 years. Most people avoid the sewers. Me? I built a career out of crawling through them. My name is Jules Martel. I'm 43, a freelance sewer inspector with a specialization in subterranean infrastructure. I've consulted with the Paris Metropole Water Authority, private engineering firms, and even the occasional historian. The pay isn't glamorous, but the solitude? Priceless. On March 3rd, I was contracted to perform a structural survey beneath the 14th arrondissement, an older section of the city with unstable limestone foundations and layers of catacombs rarely visited by tourists. The client was a private construction consortium planning to expand a subterranean parking structure near Rue de l'Acia. My job was to map water damage and identify risk points for collapse. A typical 3-day inspection. I packed my standard rig: insulated dry suit, helmet with dual LED lamps, portable LiDAR scanner, radiation and methane sensors, and my old Leica Disto X 310 laser measurer. My diving kit was also equipped with an upgraded Motorola digital radio, though I usually kept comms silent. Down there, even echoes feel intrusive. At 6:30 a.m., I checked in with the maintenance station near Porte d'Orléans and entered the secondary access tunnel. No guards, no workers. That wasn't unusual. Most shifts in this district ran evenings. I descended the ladder, dropped into a dry channel, and began logging sensor readings. The smell was potent. A mix of wet limestone, aged mildew, and something faintly metallic. Iron, maybe. The deeper I went, the stranger it got. Readings showed minor electromagnetic fluctuations. Not unheard of. Some older catacombs have high iron content, but this felt different. There was also a draft. Subtle, but consistent. Air should have been stagnant this deep. By noon, I reached an old maintenance gate half-welded open. It led to a forgotten corridor, likely a pre-Napoleonic drainage route. I checked the digital maps. This tunnel wasn't on them. That caught my attention. As I walked, I noticed bones. Not human, at first. Rat skeletons, dog remains, birds that somehow got trapped. But then I saw a skull, unmistakably human, half submerged in runoff. I paused, radioed in a short note to my external log. Unmapped passage found. Human remains, likely pre-revolution era. Continuing for visual confirmation. 20 minutes in, I hit a blockage, bricks, boards, collapsed stones. But the strangest thing wasn't the obstruction, it was a sound. Bells. Soft and irregular, like they were being rung far away. I turned off my headlamp, nothing but blackness. The sound remained, echoing faintly like it was bouncing off ancient limestone walls. Now, I've spent nights down here. You get used to strange sounds. But this, it wasn't plumbing. It wasn't pressure changes. These bells sounded ceremonial, like they belonged in a church service, not a sewer. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I climbed over the rubble. Beyond it was a staircase descending into a dry cistern. And beyond that, old Paris. Literally. Cracked Roman masonry, ancient niches, ossuaries that predated the catacombs now open to tourists. Bones stacked floor to ceiling. Skulls aligned in grim patterns. And something else, drag marks in the dust, not old ones. Fresh. Still, no signal. My radio chirped when I tried to check in, just static. That's when I heard something wet, something heavy, dragging along the stone behind me. I turned quickly, headlamps flaring across the corridor, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible, at least. just the steady sound of water dripping and that strange ringing in the distance. I scanned the floor again. More drag marks, deep, almost claw-like patterns in the old limestone. I recorded a short clip on my GoPro, time-stamped the location, and marked it with a wax crayon on the wall. Standard protocol. The further I went, the worse the air got. My oxygen filter began to hum louder. The methane warning blinked yellow. I should have gone back. Instead, I moved forward. By the time I found the sealed gate, my boots were caked in dust and crushed debris. The gate was reinforced steel. Recent. Too modern to belong to this part of the tunnel. Someone had welded it in place from the inside, sealing off what looked like a corridor leading back toward Denfert-Rochereau. I checked my location again. This gate shouldn't exist. Then I saw it. Faint red writing scrawled across the upper arch in chalk. Ne pas ouvrir, ils entendent. Do not open, they hear. My skin crawled. Before I could investigate further, my radio crackled again, this time not with static, but something else. Voices. Distorted, distant. It wasn't French, not clearly. There was heavy breathing, some kind of garbled whisper, and then screaming. I pulled my radio from its harness, tapped the frequency shift, still the same. Then silence. The tunnel fell deathly still. Suddenly, a metal clang echoed from behind me. Something had moved the debris pile I climbed over. I turned around, lights blazing, and that's when I saw it. A figure, no, two, pale, soaked, crawling on all fours with the jerky, twitchy movements. Their eyes gleamed unnaturally in the light, reflecting white like a cat's. One of them had blood trailing from its mouth. Another was missing half its face. They didn't groan, they didn't snarl, they just sprinted. I bolted. Heart hammering, oxygen rasping in my helmet. I barely managed to reach the cistern ladder, climbing 2 rungs at a time. My foot slipped, scraping against the iron rail, but I didn't stop. I could hear them below, clawing, snarling now, screeching like broken machinery. At the top, I slammed the maintenance hatch shut and welded it shut with my portable torch. Sparks flew. My hands shook. Only then did I check the surface time. It was 7:03 p.m. I'd been down there almost 13 hours. I scrambled toward the emergency exit tunnel that led to Place Denfert-Rochereau. As I climbed into the station exit shaft and pushed open the street access panel, I froze. The city was silent. Too silent. No traffic, no voices, no metro rumble. I stepped out, blinking into the orange haze of dusk. Rue de Guerre was deserted. Not a soul in sight. Bicycles lay tipped over. Storefront windows were shattered. Sirens howled in the distance, but no vehicles passed. The city I had known my entire life suddenly felt alien. There was no rhythm, no traffic drone, no echo of footsteps on cobblestone. Just wind swirling dust through the market stalls and the hollow clang of a metro gate flapping open and closed in the breeze. I adjusted my helmet, still wearing the full dry suit, visor streaked with grime and tunnel condensation. It was surreal. Surviving hours in Paris's darkest depths, only to emerge into a place that felt just as unrecognizable. The emergency frequency remained dead. I tried the general broadcast band hoping to catch Radio France, but all I got was a looped signal. Ceci est un message automatique de la préfecture de police. Restez chez vous. Fermez toutes les portes. Évitez les zones métropolitaines. The voice was synthetic, calm, eerily calm. There was no newsreader, no human response. Just this flat, automated loop repeating every 30 seconds. I pulled off the helmet, instantly regretting it. The air stank of smoke and something else. Putrid and coppery, the smell of old blood. I slung the helmet over my shoulder and started moving toward the nearby metro entrance at Mouton du Vernet. The stairs were littered with abandoned items: scarves, a baby stroller, someone's messenger bag with the zipper ripped open and papers strewn everywhere. I stepped carefully, listening for movement, but all I could hear was the soft mechanical buzz of fluorescent lights flickering below. As I descended, the lights cut out. Instantly, completely. I froze. From the darkness below came a sound, soft at first, then unmistakable. Wet footsteps. Not a rhythmic pace, like someone walking confidently. These were uneven, scraping, staggered. I backed up slowly, one step at a time, never turning away from the stairwell. Just before I reached the street level, a pale shape lunged up into the fading light. I caught only a glimpse. Shredded clothing, torn scalp, blackened fingernails curled into claws. It shrieked, not like an animal, not like a person, but something in between. High-pitched, involuntary, like a scream through a broken windpipe. I turned and sprinted, boots pounding on the sidewalk. I ducked into a narrow alley off Rue Halle, vaulted a tipped garbage bin and wedged myself behind a locked gate leading into the courtyard of an old Hautzman apartment block. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing. The creature hadn't followed me, not directly. I could hear it howling, somewhere further down the boulevard, maybe chasing a different sound. I remained still for a full 5 minutes, ears straining. Then, from deep below the street again, I heard it. A bell. That same old church bell, muffled and uneven. Once, then twice. It rang from beneath the stones, deep in the veins of the city. I climbed over the gate and slipped into the courtyard. Most of the windows were dark, but a faint glow flickered on the 3rd floor. I crept up the service stairwell, boots brushing aside piles of unopened mail and grocery flyers. At the 3rd floor, I knocked gently. Nothing, then harder. "Police," I said softly, unsure why. "Sapeurs. Qualcunissi." No answer. I tried the knob. It turned. Inside, the air was stale and dry. A single candle burned on a kitchen table. The rest of the apartment was abandoned, but not looted. Plates still sat in the drying rack. A chair was overturned as if someone had gotten up too fast. A woman's coat still hung by the door, purse dangling from the hook. But there was no one inside. I found a functioning radio near the window and turned it on. Same message. "Restez chez vous. Fermez toutes les portes." Then, for a split second, the loop stuttered. Static surged, and a different voice broke in. Crackling, male, urgent. "Catacombs compromised. Origin traced to Montsouris sector. If you hear bells, stay clear of service drains. Repeat, stay clear of all underground acoustic anomalies." Then it cut out. The loop resumed, like nothing had happened. My hands clenched around the radio. Acoustic anomalies was bureaucratic code for structural failures or strange auditory phenomena underground, something I'd encountered before in earthquake zones, but not in Paris and never linked to a biological threat. Suddenly, a faint creak came from the hallway. I froze, then slid into the shadow beside the fridge, holding my breath. A pair of slow footsteps passed the open door. Not heavy enough for boots. No talking, no flashlight. I waited until the steps faded, then peeked out. The corridor was empty again. I needed to leave. I rechecked my gear, portable torch, still good, LiDAR scanner, powered, utility knife strapped to my vest. I grabbed a heavy steel ladle from the kitchen as an improvised weapon and headed out the back entrance. In the courtyard, I nearly tripped over a figure hunched by the corner. At first, I thought it was another infected, but he didn't move. Just stared at me. "Tu n'es pas de l'heure," he muttered. He was older, maybe late 60s, wearing a maintenance vest and sitting with his back to the garden wall. His face was lined, blood on his sleeve. "Je m'appelle Jules," I said. "Tu es blessé?" He nodded, but waved me off. I locked them out, sealed the main vault, but they hear things, follow the vibrations. They came up through the ossuary near Saint-Jacques. "What are they?" I asked. His eyes were glassy. "They ring the bells." I knelt beside him. "Who rings them?" He looked directly at me. "The ones that went missing in the first wave. Workers. They don't scream anymore, just ring." A cold pit formed in my stomach. He handed me a key, rusted, marked with an orange tag labeled M02 Drain Access South Vault. His hand trembled. "Use this, but don't go back down alone. They wait below the limestone." Before I could ask anything else, he slumped forward. Not dead, but unconscious, exhausted. I checked his pulse. Still there, faint. I couldn't carry him. I had to keep moving. Armed with the key, I made my way south, cutting through alleyways, sticking to shadows. I knew the layout of the tunnels below Montsouris better than most men alive. If something had risen through that sector, it had to be spreading north, using the natural dry corridors of the forgotten aqueducts. The Carrière de Port-Mahon ran parallel, and if they'd accessed it, the old quarry tunnels might be compromised too. I reached the Parc Montsouris perimeter just before nightfall. The sky was now bruised with the red clouds and acrid smoke, and far off I could hear gunshots, sporadic, panicked. Military? Maybe, but too scattered to be coordinated. Near the south edge of the park, I found the entrance labeled on the tag. An old maintenance gate camouflaged behind hedges and fencing. I used the key. The lock gave way with a clunk. I descended. The air was heavy, moist, and wrong. The walls were closer together than I remembered. Lichen crawled along the limestone like veins. I checked my scanner. Movement ahead, low, close to the ground. Not rats. Shuffling. I moved slowly, knees bent, weapon ready. As I rounded the bend into the main inspection vault, I saw it. A line of figures, backs turned, swaying slightly. Their clothes were city utility uniforms, maintenance vests, neon stripes faded under filth and blood. In their hands, chains, pipes. One had a school bell. They were motionless at first, except for that eerie rhythmic swaying, like a trance. They stood facing the sealed vault door, an old pre-Napoleonic floodlock with rusted wheels and brass inspection valves. Something behind that door had their attention, and for a few seconds I thought, maybe they wouldn't notice me if I didn't make a sound. Then the bell rang, a single hollow clang. The sound echoed like a whisper through the limestone and the figures stopped swaying. One turned, then another. Heads snapped with unnatural precision, necks twisting too far. Their faces were pale and mottled, eyes milky and unfocused but tracking motion like a predator's. Skin sloughed away in places, revealing tendons darkened by rot. One of them, taller than the others, let out a breath that sounded like gravel scraping through metal, then lifted the chain in its hand and stepped forward. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, boots slamming against the uneven stone floor. My headlamp danced across the tunnel walls, throwing wild shadows behind me. I could hear them. Fast. Too fast for how ruined their bodies looked. Chain links clinked, metal dragged, boots pounded in unison. They weren't shambling. They were moving like they knew the tunnels, knew every turn, every narrowing crawl space, every place a man could get cornered. I cut hard into a side chamber and kicked the steel bracing on a drainage hatch, wrenching it open. It was barely wide enough to crawl through, but I forced myself in, scraping my dry suit against jagged concrete. Behind me, I heard a shriek of frustration as something slammed into the wall. They didn't follow into the pipe, not right away. I belly crawled 50 meters through the narrow tunnel, heart hammering, every inch of me coated in runoff and grit. At the end of the pipe, I dropped into a lower inspection channel, one I remembered from an older utility survey back in 2011. This section ran beneath the abandoned Vavin Metro Spur, a disconnected offshoot decommissioned during Wall 2 and bricked up. But there was a side shaft, an unofficial connection to the ossuary network used for archaeological surveys years ago. I needed to get into that ossuary. I needed to know why they were ringing those damn bells. When I reached the spur, I rested only long enough to check my gear. Battery was low, about 20% on the scanner. Oxygen rebreather still functional, but filters were maxing out. I swapped in the spare. Radio was still useless, just static, or that looping emergency message when it caught a pulse of signal through the earth. I sent a beacon ping anyway, just in case someone topside was listening. The door into the ossuary wasn't locked. In fact, it had been forced open. The hinges were bent outward. Inside, the smell hit me harder than anything before. It was the thick, suffocating scent of decay, like the air had been trapped and fermenting for centuries, then stirred up violently. The ossuary wasn't one of the public ones. No signs, no walkways, no polite "do not touch" plaques. This was a raw burial vault, stacked with skulls, femurs, and rusted tools once used to transport the dead during the Black Death. Some bones were cracked, gnawed. Others had deep gouges, as if something had clawed through them. I stepped carefully, flashlight scanning for movement. That's when I saw the first sigil. Carved into the stone in long, looping curves, the symbol resembled a bell surrounded by concentric rings and spirals. I'd seen graffiti in the tunnels before, even some disturbing art left behind by urban explorers and cataphiles, but this wasn't decorative. It was old, etched deep into the limestone with deliberate purpose. Some parts of the carving were fresh, though, scraped clean of mineral buildup. Someone had been maintaining it. I found more as I moved deeper. Symbols, circles, some filled with small bones arranged like runes, others coated in a black tar-like substance. The deeper I went, the more signs I saw. Markings on the ceiling, chalk outlines, wax seals melted into corners, and all the while the sound grew louder. The bell. Not just one anymore, a dozen, some close, some distant. They were being rung like signals, like a language. I passed a metal maintenance plate near a side chamber and something caught my eye. A faded Logoville de Paris Sécurité Subsurface Division, and a name stenciled in black. Section M, Crypt Access Restricted. I'd heard of Section M once in passing, years ago. It wasn't part of the standard city plans. Urban legend said it was a wartime crypt sealed off in the 1940s, used by resistance fighters and later by the DGSE. No one ever confirmed it. Inside that chamber, I found evidence it was very real. Crates, wooden and steel, marked with NATO inventory codes. Old communication cables run along the walls. A generator, long dead, and in the corner, an archival locker filled with waterproof folders. Some documents were mold-eaten, but others were intact. Diagrams of the Paris Catacomb network. Overlay maps showing bell symbols marked in red. Dates, incident logs, annotations in French, English, even Cyrillic. I skimmed one file marked Projet Clochette. It described an acoustic beacon system designed to operate in blackout conditions, transmitting low-frequency tones through bedrock for communication during siege or invasion scenarios. But the notes shifted halfway through. The tone became darker. Engineers noted resonance anomalies, cognitive disorientation among maintenance crews, and reanimation response from contact zones. A word stopped me cold. Reanimation. The files were dated 1991. Someone knew, long before today, and they tried to lock it down, not cure it, just contain it. I snapped photos of everything. Memory card in the GoPro was almost full, but this was more important than the tunnel scans. I needed proof. Whatever had started below Paris didn't begin this week. This was decades in the making. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate, coming down the tunnel behind me. I killed the light and backed into the shadow near the lockers, watching. A figure entered slowly, dragging something behind it. Not infected. Not like the others. This one was armored. A civilian tactical rig, black with faded patches. Gas mask over the face. In one hand it held a long pry bar, in the other, a set of wind chimes. Metal clinked softly as it walked. I held my breath. The figure walked to the center of the chamber and began placing small brass bells on the stone floor, aligning them into a circle. Then it knelt and lit a flare, red, and held it over the bells. As the flare hissed, the bells began to ring on their own. No contact, just a low harmonic vibration, as if the sound were being pulled through the ground. The figure sat silently in front of the ringing bells, head tilted toward the ceiling, waiting. For what? I didn't want to know. I slipped out through the side passage and made my way into a service aqueduct. My legs burned, my back ached, and I was out of water. I climbed through a collapsed shaft, emerging near the edge of an underground canal. Dry now, except for the trickle of runoff at the center. The air was slightly fresher here, but still heavy with dust and mildew. The only light came from my helmet's backup lamp, running on its last reserve battery. My body screamed for rest, but I wasn't about to die in a pit surrounded by history and death. What caught my attention were the footprints. Real, recent ones. Boots, narrow tread, not from an infected. These weren't dragging or erratic like the others. They had a rhythm, a direction, a purpose. Someone had come this way, and not long ago. I followed carefully, one step at a time, avoiding any splash in the thin water at the canal's base. The prints veered into a low tunnel cut into the stone, one that wasn't part of the official sewer grid. If this was one of the old emergency overflow systems, it would connect to the deeper ossuaries under the 5th arrondissement. No public tours had ever gone that far. The passage was tight and ribbed with reinforcing arches, cracked in places and weeping mineral deposits like old scars. 30 meters in, I came upon the remnants of a camp. Makeshift, but clean. Someone had been using this as a shelter. There were ration wrappers, an empty military canteen, a half-charged solar battery rig, and even a notebook with water-resistant pages. I flipped through it. Sketches of the catacomb layout, coded references, and beneath one underlined entry, Vault 47, still active, source confirmed. Do not engage directly. Avoid bell resonance. The page below had a hand-drawn symbol I recognized instantly. One of the same carvings from earlier, the bell surrounded by spirals. There was also a name on the inside cover, Dr. Theo Karadec, followed by a faded insignia I couldn't quite place. Possibly military medical, or maybe civil engineering. I had no idea if he was still alive, but judging by the cold ashes in the portable stove, he couldn't be far ahead. I packed the notebook into my satchel, checked the passage for signs of direction, and continued. The tunnel sloped downward again, leading into a carved chamber that I recognized from old maps. A forgotten aqueduct junction tied into the medieval wells once used by the Val de Grace monastery. I stopped cold at the threshold. There were bells hanging from the ceiling. Hundreds of them. Rusty ones, bronze ones, tiny copper bells once worn by plague doctors to ward off evil. They hung from rusted wire and surgical tubing, from bone splints, from loops of barbed cable. Most were silent, but a few chimed lightly in the shifting air, random tones that sent shivers up my spine. In the center of the room, on a raised platform of stone, was an altar. Not a religious one, this was a workbench, covered in medical instruments, ruined notebooks, vials, and more bells. A black case lay open nearby. Inside, syringes, sealed ampules, and a biohazard emblem half scraped away. Someone had been conducting research down here. I reached for the nearest notebook and began scanning through the legible entries. The handwriting was technical, controlled, and deeply unsettling. Notes referenced viral responses to infrasound exposure, reanimation thresholds triggered by low-frequency pulses, and something called acoustic tethering. From what I could gather, the infected were being drawn by the bell tones, not mindlessly, but through an induced neurological loop that kept them near the source. Bells weren't just symbols, they were commands. This was not a virus in the traditional sense. It was parasitic in part, but heavily intertwined with brainstem auditory processing. The first stage symptoms: fever, hallucinations, auditory distortions, then death, then reanimation. Triggered or stabilized by external resonance, particularly bells. Somehow, someone had figured this out a long time ago, and they'd buried the truth under layers of stone and silence. I heard footsteps again, this time closer, softer. I raised my headlamp and turned. A man stood at the edge of the chamber, wearing a torn field jacket and thick-frame glasses. His face was drawn, cheeks hollowed by dehydration and stress, but his eyes were sharp. He held up both hands, showing he wasn't armed. "You're not one of them," he said. I nodded. "You're Karadek." He blinked, surprised. "How do you know my name?" "Your notes, your camp upstream." I kept the ladle tight in my grip anyway. He stepped forward cautiously. "I was part of a research team. We were studying the resonance patterns below the city when we stumbled on this." He gestured around the bell-covered chamber. "We didn't start it. We just uncovered what others buried. And by then it was too late, something old woke up." I listened, not moving. He continued. "They tried to stop it with lockdowns. That's what all the sealed tunnels were. Not just for containment, but to mute the city, to break the echo paths. But it spread through maintenance systems, through underground drainage loops. We underestimated how deep it went, how many routes there were." I cut in. "The outbreak. Did it begin here?" "In part, but this isn't the origin. It's an amplifier. The infection may have started elsewhere, but this city, these tunnels, this resonance, it's what turned it into a system. The bells were never meant to guide the infected. They were part of the experiment, an attempt to override the brainstem with harmonic patterns. But it failed. Instead, it made them listen." I stared at him, absorbing the horror of it. "Why are you still down here?" "Because someone has to shut it off." He pointed to a console embedded in the wall behind the altar, ancient but wired into newer fiber channels and relays. That console controls the old underground acoustic network. We used it to broadcast test patterns. Now it's stuck in loop. The bells above are responding. Every active infected in the city is being pulled toward the signals. So, cut the power. He looked tired. "It's not that simple. The loop's on backup. The only way to shut it down permanently is to overload the system, and the failsafe is on the other side of the vault." I followed his gaze. At the far end of the chamber, behind a set of iron bars and a rolling pressure door, was the entrance to Vault 47. It was sealed with hydraulic locks and mechanical bars. I recognized the design. It was from the early Cold War, meant to survive explosions or floods. I nodded grimly, Then let's end it. Together, we began prepping. Karadek loaded what little fuel he had into an ancient generator, giving us just enough juice to open the security door. I used my torch to cut loose the final restraining clamp. As the mechanism groaned to life and the door began to slide open, a blast of hot, foul air hit us like a wave. The lights flickered. Inside, we saw them. Hundreds. Lined along the walls, standing still, dormant. Their skin was stretched, blackened, their eyes blank but twitching, waiting. And in the center of the chamber stood a massive pillar, covered in speakers and chimes. Wires ran like veins across the floor, pulsing dim red. The acoustic beacon. It was humming. Karadek stepped forward, pulled out his pack, and began rigging the explosives he'd carried with him for days. Once I overload the beacon's core, it should disrupt the frequency and send a reverse pulse through the system. It won't cure them, but it'll shut off the signal. "How long do we have?" I asked. 2 minutes, maybe less. I gripped my makeshift weapon, backing toward the door. "Then do it fast." The instant he severed the main cable, the infected stirred. No warning, just movement. Hundreds of heads turning in sync. And then they charged. I held the line as long as I could, swinging, slamming, kicking anything that moved. Karadek screamed over the chaos, setting the detonator and priming the charge. "Run!" he shouted. I didn't argue. I sprinted back through the chamber of bells, deafened by the noise as they rang from vibration alone. I reached the aqueduct tunnel just as the blast went off, muffled, deep, like a detonation inside a cave sealed by centuries of silence. The resonance stopped. Just like that. The air fell still. No more bells, no more humming, just silence. I made it to the surface near Rue Claude Bernard as dawn broke over Paris. The streets were still empty, but the sirens were fading. In the far distance, I heard helicopters. A convoy moved slowly down Boulevard Saint-Michel. Survivors were being evacuated. The infected were disoriented. Some had collapsed entirely. Karadek didn't make it, but he stopped the signal. And I finally surfaced, alive. For now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.